A man set his drink down so hard the ice cracked, and every head in that ballroom turned to watch him do the one thing nobody expected. His friend grabbed his sleeve. "Don't. Walk away. Ask them for a different table." But Nathan Cole pulled his arm free, straightened his collar, and walked straight toward the woman everyone in the room had already written off, the one they whispered about, the one they pitied, the one they were certain he'd reject in front of all of them. He didn't reject her. What he did instead left 200 people speechless, and it's the reason her entire life was about to change. Stay with me all the way to the end, because the ending will surprise you. And do me a favor, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled tonight. If stories about second chances and real love move you, subscribe and follow the channel, because this is one you'll want to finish. The card in Nathan Cole's hand said Table 7, and the moment his friend Marcus read it over his shoulder, he started laughing. "You're kidding me," Marcus said. "They matched you with her." Nathan looked up from the little cream-colored card. "With who?" "Don't play dumb." Marcus tilted his head toward the far side of the ballroom, toward the window where a woman sat alone. "Table 7, that's Victoria Bennett. You know who that is." "Should I?" Marcus lowered his voice like he was sharing a secret worth money. "Bennett. As in Bennett Technologies. As in the CEO. As in, she's got more money than everybody in this room combined, and she's got about 12 years on you easy. Buddy, they gave you a bad card. Go get a new one." Nathan didn't answer right away. He was looking across the room at the woman by the window. Everyone else at this mixer was performing. That was the only word for it. Men were laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny. Women were checking their reflections in the dark glass of the windows, and then pretending they hadn't. There was a whole table of people near the bar, taking turns holding their phones up at flattering angles, and another cluster of men by the coat check comparing watches, like it was a competition nobody had officially started. And then there was the woman at Table 7. She wasn't performing anything. She had a book open in front of her. An actual book with a cracked spine and a dozen little paper flags sticking out of the top of it. She wasn't reading to look interesting. She wasn't holding it up so people could see the title. She had her chin propped on one hand, and she was genuinely completely lost in it, the way a person reads when they've forgotten there's anybody else in the room. Nathan had spent 3 years of his life feeling invisible in crowded rooms. He knew what it looked like when someone had made peace with being overlooked. "You seeing this?" Marcus was still talking. "Half the room's already talking about it. Bennett and the single dad. They're gonna say the app's broken. You want to be the guy people laugh about on the drive home? Go to the desk. Get a different table. Nobody's gonna blame you." Nathan turned the card over in his fingers. On the back, in the same careful print, it said, "We think you'll be surprised." He almost laughed himself. "Nate, you listening to me?" "I heard you." "So." Nathan set his drink down on the nearest table. He didn't do it gently. The glass hit the wood, and the ice inside it cracked, and a couple of people nearby glanced over. "So I'm gonna go sit at Table 7, Nathan said. Marcus stared at him. "You're joking." "I'm not." "Why, give me one reason." Nathan looked at his friend, and for a second something crossed his face that Marcus didn't have a name for. Then it was gone. "Because," Nathan said, "she's the only person in this entire room who isn't pretending to be somebody else. And I'm tired of pretending." And with that, he walked. He felt the eyes on him. He wasn't imagining it. He'd been in this business long enough, the business of being a man whose life didn't look the way it was supposed to feel the exact temperature of a room's attention. It was warm on the back of his neck the whole way across that floor. He heard a woman near the bar murmur something to her friend. He heard the friend laugh behind her hand. Let them, Nathan thought. He'd survived worse than a room full of strangers laughing at him. He'd survived the sound of a front door closing 3 years ago and knowing it wasn't going to open again. He'd survived a 4-year-old asking him where mommy went and not having a single word in his whole vocabulary that would make it hurt less. A ballroom of people betting on how fast he'd embarrass himself didn't even register on the same scale. He reached table 7. Victoria Bennett looked up from her book. Up close, she was more striking than she'd looked from across the room. Not because of makeup or a dress, though the dress was clearly expensive in that quiet way that didn't announce itself. It was her eyes. They were sharp, alert. The eyes of a person who had spent a lifetime reading people faster than they wanted to be read, and who had learned not to like most of what she found. She looked at Nathan, the way you'd look at a door-to-door salesman who'd already gotten one foot inside. "You're my match," she said. Nathan looked down at his card, then back up at her. "That's what it says. Apparently somebody decided we belonged at the same table." She closed the book slowly with a folded corner of a napkin to hold her place, which told him she cared about the book more than she cared about most people. She set it down beside her. "Interesting," she said. "Most people would have asked for a different seat by now." Nathan pulled out the chair across from her. "I'm not most people." He sat down, and behind him, without turning around to look, he could feel the exact moment the room realized he wasn't leaving. The murmur changed pitch. The laughing stopped for a second, then started up again, sharper and more curious than before. Victoria noticed it too. Of course she did. She noticed everything. "You realize," she said, folding her hands on the table, "that you're going to be a story now. Somewhere in this room at least 4 people are already deciding what the moral of it is." "Let them decide," Nathan said. "It's a free country." "You say that like it doesn't bother you." "It doesn't." She studied him. He let her. He'd learned a long time ago that when someone was trying to figure out your angle, the fastest way to disarm them was to not have one. "Everyone has an angle," she said as if she'd heard the thought. "Not everyone. In my experience, everyone." "Then maybe," Nathan said, "you've been meeting the wrong people." Something flickered across her face. Just for a second. Then it was gone, buried under the same composed expression she'd probably worn through 1,000 boardroom negotiations. A young server came by with a tray. "Something to drink for the table. Water," Victoria said, still not sparkling. "Same," Nathan said. "Thank you." The server left. Victoria arched an eyebrow. Water. Bold choice for a singles mixer. "I've got a 7-year-old at home," Nathan said. "The last thing that little girl needs is her dad coming home from a party unable to help her with a math worksheet." He said it plainly. He wasn't trying to impress her with it, wasn't trying to signal, "Look what a good father I am." It was just the truth of his Tuesday nights. But it landed differently than he expected. Victoria went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have a daughter." "Lily. She's 7. And her mother, not in the picture, hasn't been for 3 years. He watched Victoria's face while he said it, because that was usually the moment when women at these things started calculating. Single father, full-time, the ex who left. He could practically see the arithmetic happening behind their eyes, too much baggage, too complicated, too much of somebody else's mess to clean up. But Victoria didn't do that. She just nodded slowly, and something in her expression softened by a single degree. "That's hard," she said. Not, "I'm sorry," not the reflexive thing people said, just "that's hard," like she actually knew it was. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done," Nathan admitted. "And I've done some hard things. Do you regret it?" The question caught him off guard. Most people never asked it. Most people assumed the answer one way or the other. "Regret what?" "Any of it," Victoria said. "The marriage, staying, the whole thing." Nathan turned his water glass a quarter turn on the table. He thought about it because she'd asked it like she actually wanted the real answer and not the polite one. "I regret how it ended," he said finally. "I don't regret her. My daughter, I mean. She's the reason I get up in the morning. So no. Whatever else I lost, I got her out of it. That's not the kind of thing you regret." Victoria was watching him very closely now. The book was forgotten. The room was forgotten. For the first time since he'd sat down, she wasn't looking at him like a puzzle to solve or a salesman to get rid of. "Most men," she said slowly, "would have led with the company they work for, or the car they drive, or the deal they just closed. You led with your daughter. She's the most important thing I've got. Why would I lead with anything else? Victoria didn't answer. She looked out the window for a moment at the city lights spread out below them, and Nathan had the strange feeling that he'd said something that reached a lot further into her than he'd intended. Across the room, Marcus was watching all this with his arms crossed, shaking his head. He caught Nathan's eye and mouthed the words, "What are you doing?" Nathan ignored him. "Can I ask you something?" Nathan said. Victoria turned back from the window. "You can ask. I don't promise to answer." "That book." He nodded at it. "What is it?" She blinked. Whatever question she'd been braced for, it wasn't that one. "You want to know about the book?" "I want to know about the book." She picked it up, almost protectively, ran her thumb along the cracked spine. "It's a collection of letters. Correspondence between two writers who spent 40 years writing to each other and never once met in person. They lived on different continents. They just wrote. For 4 decades. Did they ever want to meet? That's the whole question of the book," Victoria said. And for the first time all night, something lit up in her face. Something young. Something that had nothing to do with boardrooms or balance sheets. They talk about it sometimes. Whether meeting would ruin it. Whether the distance was actually the thing that let them be honest. When you know you'll never sit across a table from someone, you tell them things you'd never say out loud. And what do they decide? I don't know yet. She smiled a real one, small, but real. I'm only halfway through. I keep buying copies and getting halfway and stopping. I think I don't want to know how it ends. Why not? Because as long as I don't finish it, they can still meet. Once I read the last page, whatever happened is what happened forever. Nathan leaned back in his chair. That's the most honest thing anybody said to me in about 3 years, he said. Victoria looked at him sharply, as if checking whether he was making fun of her. He wasn't. She could see that he wasn't, and that seemed to unsettle her more than an insult would have. You're strange, she said. I get that a lot. No, I mean it. She searched for the word, you're not doing the thing. What thing? The thing everyone in this room does when they find out who I am. The recalibration. I watch it happen on their faces like a light switching. The second they hear Bennett Technologies, they stop seeing a person and start seeing an opportunity. A door to walk through, a name to drop later. You didn't do it. I didn't know who you were until my friend told me 30 seconds before I walked over. And now that you know, Nathan shrugged. Now I know you buy the same book over and over because you're scared of the ending. That's a lot more interesting to me than a company. Victoria stared at him. And then very quietly, so quietly, he almost didn't catch it, she said, Nobody talks to me like this. Like what? Like I'm not made of money. The words hung there between them. Nathan realized all at once that he'd stumbled into something much bigger than a bad seating assignment. This wasn't a woman who'd never been wanted. This was a woman who'd been wanted for the wrong things, by the wrong people, for so long that being wanted for the right ones felt like a foreign language. He'd felt a version of that himself. Different flavor, same bone. He knew what it was to have people look at you and see a role, the single dad, the sad case, the guy whose wife left instead of a person. You want to know what I see? Nathan asked. Victoria's guard came up instantly, reflexively. Not particularly. Too bad. He said it gently with the ghost of a smile. I see somebody who's exhausted. Her jaw tightened. I'm not saying you look tired, he added quickly. You don't. You look like you could run this whole building if you wanted to. I mean, you've been on for so long you forgot there was an off switch. Everybody in your life needs something from you. Investors need money. Employees need decisions. The people at these things need connections. And somewhere in there, the number of people who just want to know how your day actually went dropped down to about 0. Victoria didn't say anything. She didn't say anything for a long time. And Nathan understood, watching her face, that he'd read it exactly right, and that reading it right had cost her something to have witnessed. You have no idea, she finally said, how tired I am. I might have a little idea. No, you don't. She wasn't being cruel. She was just being honest in the flat, exhausted way that honesty comes out when you've held it in too long. You have a daughter who needs you. That's a weight, I know it's a weight, I'm not diminishing it. But she needs you. Nathan. She needs her father, the actual person. Do you understand the difference? Nobody needs me. They need what I can do. They need what I can sign. They need what I can approve or fund or fix. If I disappeared tomorrow and left the company running, most of the people in my life wouldn't notice for a week. That's not true. It is. You have a daughter too, don't you? Victoria's head came up. How did you know that? I didn't. You just talked about needing the way somebody talks who's got a kid. Am I wrong? Victoria let out a breath. It shook slightly on the way out. Emily, she said. She's 10. Emily, Nathan repeated. And what does Emily need? Her mother, Victoria said. Who is never home? Who is at events like this one instead of home? Who built an entire company so that her daughter would never have to struggle the way she struggled, and somewhere in the middle of building it, forgot that a 10-year-old doesn't care about the struggle she's being protected from. She cares whether you're at dinner. Nathan didn't say anything. He just let her keep going because she was going now, and he had the sense she hadn't let herself say any of this out loud in a very long time. I grew up with nothing, Victoria said. You want the whole story? Fine. 2-room apartment, mother worked 3 jobs. We moved every time we couldn't make rent, which was often. I decided when I was about Emily's age that I was never ever going to feel that scared again. And I didn't. I clawed my way up and I built something, and now I have more money than I could spend in 4 lifetimes, and I never feel that particular fear anymore. She paused. And I traded it for a different one, which is that my daughter is going to grow up and remember exactly one thing about me, that I wasn't there. The words fell onto the table between them like a dropped glass. Nathan sat with it. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He'd learned raising Lily that the worst thing you could do when someone finally told you the true thing was to trample it with reassurance. Can I tell you something? He said after a while. And I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying it because it's true. Go ahead. The fact that you're scared of that, the fact that it keeps you up at night, that's the whole thing right there. The parents who mess their kids up the worst are the ones who never worry about it for a second. You've been sitting here for 2 minutes telling me the thing that scares you most in the world is that your kid won't feel you showed up. You know who worries about that? People who are going to show up. You're just late to figuring out how. That's not the same as being a bad mother. That's a scheduling problem with a broken heart attached to it. Victoria looked at him, and her eyes were wet. She blinked it back hard. She was not a woman who cried at parties. He could tell that much. She'd probably built an entire career on not being a woman who cried. But for one unguarded second, the composure cracked, and behind it, he saw exactly how long she'd been carrying this thing alone. You're doing it again, she whispered. Doing what? Talking to me like I'm a person. Across the room, the mixer had moved on. The organizers were ringing a little bell, announcing that in 10 minutes, everyone would rotate to a new table, meet a new match, start the whole performance over again. The bar was crowded. The watches were still being compared by the coat check. Somewhere Marcus was probably telling 3 different people that his buddy had lost his mind. But at table 7, none of it was happening. At table 7, 2 people who had spent years being seen as everything except themselves had accidentally found the one other person in the building who wasn't looking at the label. I have to ask you something, Nathan said, and you can tell me it's none of my business. You've asked me about 10 things that are none of your business. This one's worse. Now I'm curious. Go ahead. Nathan leaned forward, elbows on the table. When was the last time somebody asked you how your day was and actually waited for the answer? Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. I don't know, she said, and she sounded genuinely thrown by it, like she'd gone to reach for a number and found the shelf empty. I can't tell you. That's... She laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's a horrifying thing to not have an answer to, isn't it? Then I'll ask you, Nathan said. How was your day, Victoria? She stared at him. You don't want to hear about my day. I asked, didn't I? I don't ask questions I don't want the answer to. Ask my daughter. She'll tell you I'm the only dad at pickup who actually wants to hear the whole story about the lunchroom drama. Victoria laughed again, and this time there was something in it. Something real, something that surprised her as much as it surprised him. My day, she said slowly, testing the shape of it, was long. It started at 5 with a call to our office in Singapore, which went badly because the deal I've been building for 8 months is coming apart, and 3 people who work for me are pretending it isn't. Then I had a lunch I don't remember eating with a board member who wants me to step back from day-to-day operations, which is a very polite way of telling a woman my age that she's in the way. Then I went home for exactly 40 minutes, and my daughter was already at a friend's house, so I didn't see her. And then I put on this dress and came to a party I didn't want to attend because my assistant said, and I quote, "You need to have a life outside that building." She spread her hands. And here I am, having a life. And how's it going? Nathan asked. The life. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Better than I expected, she said quietly. In the last 20 minutes. The bell rang again. 2 minutes to rotate. A man was already hovering near their table. A tanned, silver-haired man in a suit that cost more than Nathan's car, holding his own little cream card and eyeing table 7 like it was a reservation he intended to claim. Nathan recognized the type instantly. He'd bet money the card in that man's hand had a company's net worth already calculated on the back of it. Victoria saw the man too. And something changed in her posture. She straightened up the softness, folding back inside her like a letter going back into an envelope. The CEO returned. The armor came back on. That's my next match, I imagine, she said, and her voice had gone cool and even again. Don't feel obligated to defend the table. I wasn't planning to defend anything. Good. The silver-haired man arrived, all teeth and cologne. Victoria Bennett, he said, like her name was a prize he'd won. I've been trying to get an introduction to you for 2 years, and here fate hands you to me at a singles mixer. He laughed at his own line and set his card down on the table without asking. Roger Vance, Vance Capital. I think you and I have a great deal to discuss. Nathan watched Victoria's face do the exact thing she'd described earlier, except in reverse. He watched her become the label on purpose as a shield. Watched her put on the polished, distant, untouchable version of herself that these men expected because it was easier than being touched. Mr. Vance, she said smoothly. Have a seat. Roger Vance looked at Nathan for the first time and dismissed him in the same glance. You're finished here, right, pal? Table's rotating. Nathan stood up. He didn't argue. He didn't make a scene. But before he pushed his chair in, he looked at Victoria. Really looked at her, past the armor, at the tired person he'd been talking to for 20 minutes. It was the best conversation I've had in 3 years, he said. Simple. True. Thank you for the book recommendation. I hope you finish it. And then he did something that Roger Vance clearly did not expect, and that Victoria Bennett did not expect either. He took his own cream-colored card, the one that said Table 7 on the front, and, "We think you'll be surprised," on the back, and he set it down on the table in front of her. "In case you ever want to know how it ends," he said. Then he walked away. He didn't look back. He wove through the tables, past the watch comparers and the phone anglers, and the whole performing crowd of them back toward Marcus, who was staring at him with his mouth slightly open. "Well," Marcus demanded. "What happened?" "You were over there for 20 minutes. Everybody was watching. What did she say? Did she blow you off? Did she—" "She recommended a book?" Nathan said. Marcus blinked. "A book. A collection of letters. 2 writers who never met. Nate, buddy, I'm going to need you to explain to me what just happened, because from over here, it looked like you sat down with the richest woman in the building and had the time of your life, and now you're walking away from her, and none of that makes sense." Nathan picked his drink back up from where he'd set it down. The ice had long since melted. "You know what the worst part of the last 3 years has been," he said. "It's not being alone. I can do alone. I'm good at alone. The worst part is that everybody looks at me and sees the guy his wife left, like it's a stamp on my forehead, like I'm damaged goods with a kid attached." He took a sip, grimaced, set it down. "And I sat down at that table tonight because I saw somebody the whole room had decided was one thing: old, rich, out of options. And I thought I know exactly what that feels like, to be a thing instead of a person." "So you what? You felt sorry for her?" "No." Nathan shook his head. "No, that's the thing. I sat down feeling sorry for her maybe. But somewhere in the first 5 minutes that flipped completely. She's the smartest, sharpest, most honest person I've talked to since before Lily could walk. She reads letters between dead writers because she's scared of how they end. She built a company out of nothing because she was terrified of being poor, and now she's terrified her kid won't remember her. That's not somebody to feel sorry for, Marcus. That's just somebody nobody's been paying attention to." Marcus was quiet for a second. "So, why'd you walk away?" Nathan glanced back over his shoulder just once toward table 7. Roger Vance was mid-sentence, gesturing with both hands clearly deep into whatever pitch he'd been rehearsing for 2 years. And Victoria was nodding along with that cool, distant professional smile. But her hand was resting on the table, and under her hand was a cream-colored card that said, "Table 7. Because," Nathan said, turning back to his friend, "I don't chase people. I never have. If I'm the guy she wants to talk to, she knows where to find me now. And if I'm not," he shrugged, "then I got the best conversation I've had in 3 years, and I get to go home to the best kid in the world. That's not a bad night, Marcus. That's a pretty good night." "You're insane," Marcus said, but he said it with something close to admiration. "Maybe." The mixer went on around them. The bell rang for the final rotation. People shuffled and laughed and performed and compared and angled the whole exhausting machinery of 200 lonely people trying to look like they weren't. Nathan checked his watch, a cheap one. No cologne-soaked stranger would ever be impressed by it, and did the math on getting home before the babysitter's rate went up. "I gotta go," he said. "Lily's got a spelling test in the morning and I promised I'd quiz her at breakfast." "You're leaving now, I got what I came for." "Which was?" Nathan smiled. "I proved to myself I could still surprise somebody, even if that somebody was just me." He clapped Marcus on the shoulder, set his melted drink on a passing tray, and headed for the coat check. He was almost to the door when he heard it. "Nathan." He turned. Victoria Bennett was standing up from table 7. Roger Vance was still talking, but she wasn't listening to him anymore. She'd risen right up out of the middle of his sentence, leaving him blinking at an empty chair. She had her book in one hand, and in the other, held up between 2 fingers so he could see it clearly across the crowded room, was the cream-colored card. "You forgot something," she called. The room, which had been performing all night, went quiet again, the same way it had gone quiet when he first walked over to her table. 200 people, all of them suddenly very interested. Nathan walked back toward her, slowly this time. Not because he was nervous, because he wanted to make sure he heard whatever she was about to say. He stopped a few feet away. "That's yours," he said. "I gave it to you." "I know." Victoria turned the card over in her fingers, looked at the words printed on the back. "We think you'll be surprised," and then looked back up at him. "The thing is, you gave me your only way of finding me again. That doesn't seem very smart for a man who claims he doesn't chase people. You just handed me all the leverage and walked off." "I don't need leverage," Nathan said. "I told you, if you want to talk again, you'll find me. If you don't, you won't. And if I told you I don't play games where I have to go find the man myself." Nathan considered that. "Then I'd say you've spent so long being pursued for the wrong reasons that you've forgotten what it's like to just decide something. Straight out. No strategy. So I'll make it easy for you." He took a step closer, lowered his voice, so it was just for her, and not for the 200 people leaning in to hear. "My name's Nathan Cole. I have a 7-year-old named Lily. I work in operations. I drive a car you'd be embarrassed to be seen in, and I have exactly zero interest in your company, your money, or anything you can do for me. What I am interested in is whether those 2 writers ever met. So, when you finish the book, if you finish the book. He nodded at the card in her hand. You know how to reach me. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked out of that ballroom past the coat checkout into the cool night air, leaving Victoria Bennett standing in the middle of 200 staring people, holding a cream-colored card in one hand and a book she was afraid to finish in the other. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, longer than she wanted to admit, longer than she'd have confessed to a single soul in that room, Victoria Bennett was the one who felt surprised. She looked down at the card. We think you'll be surprised. Well, she murmured to nobody, to the book, to the emptied chair where a single father had just sat and seen straight through her in 20 minutes flat. They were right. Roger Vance cleared his throat behind her. Victoria, as I was saying about the merger structure. But Victoria Bennett wasn't listening. She was watching the door. She waited 9 days. Nathan knew it was 9 days because he'd stopped counting on the third one, and then caught himself counting again on the 9th, which told him something he wasn't ready to admit out loud. He'd told Marcus he didn't chase people, and that was true. What he hadn't mentioned was that not chasing somebody and not thinking about them were two entirely different disciplines, and he was only good at one of them. The text came on a Tuesday night at 9:47 after Lily was asleep. I finished the book. That was all it said. No name, no introduction. She didn't need one. There was only one person on earth who'd send him those 3 words and expect him to understand them. Nathan sat on the edge of his couch, staring at the phone, and he found that his heart was doing something it hadn't done in 3 years. He typed back and the 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. He could picture her on the other end, a woman who negotiated 9-figure deals without blinking, deleting, and retyping a text message. They never met, she wrote. 40 years of letters, and when he finally bought the plane ticket, she'd already died. He found out from her sister. She left him every letter he'd ever sent her, tied with a ribbon, in a drawer by her bed. Nathan read it twice. So you were right, he wrote. You didn't want to know how it ended. No, I'm glad I know. I just spent 3 years too long being afraid of a book because I was afraid it would tell me something about my own life. And it did. It just wasn't what I expected. What did it tell you? The dots again. Longer this time. That you can spend 40 years being honest with someone and still run out of time to actually sit across a table from them. That distance feels safe right up until it's the only thing you have left. Nathan put the phone down on his knee for a second. Then he picked it back up. Have dinner with me, he typed. He didn't overthink it. He'd learned somewhere in the last 3 years that overthinking was just fear wearing a suit. He hit send before the fear could get its tie on. The dots appeared immediately, then stopped, then started. I don't know how to do this, Nathan. Do what this? Any of this. I know how to run a company. I know how to sit across a table from a man who wants to buy my company or sell me his or bury me in the market. I know exactly what to do with those men. You I don't have a playbook for. You scare me a little. Nathan smiled at his phone in the dark of his living room. Good, he wrote. We're even. You scare me too. You use words like leverage in casual conversation. That was one time. It was a memorable time. Dinner. Thursday. I'll pick a place that doesn't have a wine list longer than the Bible so you're not tempted to talk business with the sommelier. There was a long pause. Then, okay. Just that. Okay. From a woman who Nathan would later learn had not said a simple, unqualified yes to a personal invitation in probably 6 years. He set the phone down and stared at the ceiling and grinned like an idiot until he heard Lily's door creak. Daddy! His daughter was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, hair everywhere, clutching the one-eyed rabbit she'd had since she was 2. Why are you smiling at the wall? I'm not smiling at the wall. You are. I saw you. She padded over and climbed up next to him on the couch, uninvited the way 7-year-olds do. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Nathan pulled her in against his side. Good thing, I think. What kind of good thing? He considered lying. Decided against it. He'd promised himself 3 years ago, when it was just the two of them, and a mountain of nights to get through, that he would never lie to this kid about the things that mattered. "I met somebody," he said. "A friend. And I'm going to have dinner with her on Thursday." Lily processed this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. A girlfriend or a friend. Somewhere in between, maybe. We'll see. Does she have kids? She has a daughter, a little older than you, 10. Lily wrinkled her nose. 10-year-olds think 7-year-olds are babies. Some do. Maybe this one doesn't. He kissed the top of her head. You don't have to worry about any of that yet. It's just dinner. Now go back to bed. You've got school. Can I stay till you fall asleep? I'm not the one going to sleep, kiddo. You are. 5 minutes. 2. 4. Bed. She went, but not before making him pinky promise that if the dinner went well, he'd tell her about it, which he did, because you don't break a pinky promise not to a 7-year-old, not ever. The dinner went well. It went so well that it turned into a second one, and a third, and by the end of a month, it had stopped being a series of separate dinners and started being a thing they simply did the way you don't schedule breathing. They met at the little Italian place with the short wine list. They met at a diner near his office where the coffee was terrible, and Victoria drank 3 cups of it anyway, because she said it was the first restaurant in a decade where nobody had recognized her. They met at a bookstore, an old one, the kind she'd smiled about at the mixer, and Nathan watched her move through the aisles like a person walking through a memory, running her fingers along the spines, and he thought, this is who she is when nobody's watching. This is the person the whole ballroom missed, but not everyone was happy about it. Marcus was the first to say it out loud. They were watching a game at Nathan's place, or pretending to, and Marcus muted the TV during a commercial and turned to him with the face of a man about to say something he'd been rehearsing. Can I ask you something, and you don't get mad? You're going to ask either way. This thing with Bennett, it's been what, a month? About that. And you're serious about it? I am. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. Nate, come on. Think about this for a second. She's 12 years older than you. She's got more money than God. She runs a company with thousands of people in it. And you're... He gestured vaguely at the apartment, at the second-hand couch, at the spelling worksheets, stuck to the fridge, with a magnet, shaped like a banana. You're this. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a Nate. What happens in 2 years when she's tired of slumming it? When one of those Roger Vance guys shows up with a yacht and a matching net worth, where does that leave you? Where does it leave Lily? Nathan didn't answer right away. He got up, went to the kitchen, came back with 2 more drinks. He handed one to Marcus and sat back down. You want to know the truth? He said. I've thought about all of that. Every word you just said I've said to myself at 2 in the morning. What's a woman like that doing with a guy like me? When does the shoe drop? Am I setting my daughter up to lose somebody else? He took a sip. I've turned it over about 1,000 times. And here's what I keep landing on. Every single reason you just listed for why I shouldn't be with her, the money, the company, the age, all of it, every one of those reasons is about what she has. Not one of them is about who she is. That's a nice line, but it's not a line, Marcus. Listen to me. Nathan leaned forward. You know what she told me the 3rd time we had dinner? She told me the last time somebody asked how her day went and actually waited for the answer she couldn't remember. She couldn't come up with a date. This is a woman surrounded by people 24 hours a day, and she couldn't remember the last time one of them wanted to know how she was. You know what that is? That's the loneliest thing I've ever heard. And you're sitting here telling me I should walk away from her because she's got too much. Marcus was quiet. She's not slumming it, Nathan said. That's the part you've got backwards. She's not lowering herself to be with me. For the first time in 20 years, somebody's talking to the actual her instead of the woman on the magazine cover. If anybody's getting the better end of this deal... He shook his head. It's not clear it's her is what I'm saying. Marcus turned that over for a while. Then he said quietly, and Lily. Lily's the reason I'm being careful, Nathan said. That kid has lost one person already. I'm not going to let her get attached to somebody who's going to disappear. so no, they haven't met. And they won't until I know for sure. But Marcus. He looked his friend dead in the eye. I'm getting pretty sure. Marcus let out a long breath. Then he unmuted the TV. For what it's worth, he said, eyes on the screen. The way you talk about her, I've known you 15 years. You didn't talk about your wife like that. Nathan didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. What Marcus didn't know, what Nathan himself was only beginning to understand, was that Victoria was fighting the exact same war on the other side of town, except her doubters had a great deal more power than a best friend with a beer. It started with a phone call from her mother. Victoria's mother, Eleanor, was 73 and still lived within an hour of the two-room apartment she'd raised Victoria in a house Victoria had bought her that Eleanor refused to fully move into, keeping most of her things in 3 rooms out of what she called sensibility, and Victoria called stubbornness. I hear you've been seeing someone, Eleanor said without preamble, the way she'd been opening phone calls Victoria's entire life. Who told you that? You did, just now, by not denying it. Eleanor made a small, satisfied sound. So, who is he? His name is Nathan. And what does Nathan do? Victoria closed her eyes. Here it was. He's in operations, at a mid-sized logistics company. A pause. Operations. Yes, Mother. So he works for a living. Most people do. Don't be smart with me, Victoria Ann. You know exactly what I'm asking. This man, this operations man, does he know who you are? What you have? He knows. And what does he want? And there it was, the question. The same question every single person in Victoria's life reached for eventually, the question that had come to define how she moved through the world. What does he want? Because in Victoria Bennett's experience, everybody wanted something, and the only real question was how long it took them to name it. That's the thing, Mother, Victoria said slowly. I've been trying to figure that out for a month, and as far as I can tell, he doesn't want anything. Eleanor laughed sharp and short. Everybody wants something. That's what I used to think. That's not what you used to think. That's what I taught you, and I taught it to you because it kept you alive. You forget where we come from. A man like that looks at a woman like you, and he doesn't see a woman, he sees a lottery ticket. And by the time you figure out you've been played, you'll have... He gave me back the card, Victoria said. Eleanor stopped. What? At the mixer. The card that matched us to the same table. He gave it to me and walked out. Handed me the only way of contacting him again and left. If he were playing me Mother, he'd have gotten my number. He'd have followed up. He'd have made himself impossible to lose. He did the opposite. He made it so that if we ever spoke again, it was because I decided it. A man playing a lottery ticket doesn't hand the ticket back. There was a long silence on the line. I don't like it, Eleanor finally said. You don't have to like it. You've been hurt before, Victoria. You've had people get close for money before. Your father. Don't. Victoria's voice went flat and hard, the boardroom voice. Don't bring him into this. I'm only saying. I know what you're saying. You've been saying it my whole life. Trust no one. Everyone wants something. Keep the door locked. And you know what, Mother? It worked. I built a company on it. I got us out of that apartment on it. And I'm 48 years old, and I have 3 houses and a jet and a company worth more than the town we grew up in, and I have never once, not one single time, had a man ask me how my day went and wait for the answer. Her voice cracked just slightly on the last word. Until 3 weeks ago. So forgive me if I'm not in a hurry to lock the door again. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. You sound like you're falling for him, she said. And it wasn't approval, but it wasn't quite the warning it had been either. I don't know what I'm doing, Victoria admitted, and it was the most honest thing she'd said to her mother in years. That's what's terrifying. I always know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. Then be careful, Eleanor said. Which from Eleanor was practically a blessing. But her mother was the easy one. The board was not. The board found out the way boards always find out, through a photograph. Somebody at the diner near Nathan's office had recognized Victoria after all, despite her belief that she was invisible there, and had taken a picture of the CEO of Bennett Technologies laughing over bad coffee with an unremarkable man in an off-the-rack jacket, and that picture found its way to exactly the person Victoria least wanted to have it. Gerald Hume had been on Victoria's board for 9 years, and he had spent at least the last 2 of them building a quiet case that Victoria was, in his carefully chosen phrase, past the point where her judgment can be relied upon without oversight. He was the board member from the Mixer story, the one who'd suggested over a lunch she didn't remember eating that she stepped back from day-to-day operations. He wanted her chair. He'd wanted it for years. And a photograph of the CEO looking love-struck over $4 coffee with a nobody was, to a man like Gerald Hume, a gift. He brought it up in a closed session, slid a printed copy across the mahogany table like it was evidence in a trial. "I think we need to have a conversation," Gerald said, "about optics." Victoria looked at the photograph, looked at her own face in it, genuinely happy, unguarded mid-laugh, a version of herself she barely recognized because she saw it so rarely. "That's a nice picture," she said. "Victoria, no, I mean it. I look happy. When's the last time you saw a picture of me looking happy?" "Gerald, take your time." A few of the other board members shifted uncomfortably. Gerald pressed on. "The company is in the middle of the most delicate acquisition in its history. Our stock is sensitive. Our investors are watching the leadership for any sign of instability. And our CEO is being photographed in—" He checked his notes. Actually checked his notes as if he'd rehearsed this. "A diner with a man our research indicates is a divorced single father, an operations middle manager with no assets, no profile, and no—" "You ran research on him." Victoria said it very quietly. Gerald had the grace to look for half a second like he knew he'd stepped somewhere he shouldn't. But only for half a second. "Due diligence. Given your position, given the exposure, it would be irresponsible not to. You ran a background check on a man I've had dinner with 4 times. Victoria's voice didn't rise. That was the frightening thing about it, the thing that made 2 of the other board members go very still. It didn't rise at all. "You spent company resources investigating my personal life, and then you brought a photograph of me to this table like I'm a teenager who broke curfew." "I brought a legitimate governance concern. His name is Nathan Cole." Victoria stood up. She placed both hands flat on the mahogany. "He has a 7-year-old daughter named Lily. He has never once asked me for a single thing. He does not know I'm in this room defending him, because it would never occur to him that he needed defending, because unlike everyone at this table, he has never seen me as a resource to be managed." She looked slowly around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "And the fact that this board thinks my personal happiness is a governance concern tells me far more about this board than it does about me." "Victoria, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I'm going to be very reasonable, so listen closely." She picked up the photograph, folded it once, and put it in her jacket pocket. "This photograph is mine now. And Gerald. The next time you spend company resources investigating a private citizen because he had the audacity to make me laugh, I will bring that to this table as a governance concern. And I'll bring it with the general counsel sitting right next to me. Are we clear?" The room was silent. "I asked if we're clear." "We're clear," Gerald said. But his eyes had gone cold, and Victoria knew she'd sat across enough tables from enough men like him to know that she hadn't won. She'd only postponed. Men like Gerald Hume didn't retreat. They regrouped. She left the session and drove herself home. No driver, and she sat in her car in the garage for 20 minutes before she trusted her hands enough to text Nathan. "Rough day," she wrote. "Tell me," he wrote back within a minute. Always within a minute. She looked at those 2 words on the screen. "Tell me." Not what happened, which demanded a report. Not "are you okay," which demanded reassurance. Just tell me. An open door with nothing required of her but to walk through it, and she found sitting alone in her car in the dark of her garage that her eyes were stinging. "A member of my board investigated you," she typed. Background check. Brought a photo of us to a closed session and called our relationship a governance concern. I'm sorry. You got dragged into my world today, and you didn't even know it. The dots appeared. She braced for it for the retreat. For maybe this is too complicated for the entirely reasonable response of a sane man realizing he'd wandered into a world of board intrigue and billion-dollar acquisitions and background checks, a world with nothing in it for him but scrutiny. Did you defend me? Nathan wrote. She stared at the question. Of all the things he could have asked. Yes, she wrote. Then I'm not sorry, he wrote back. I'm proud of you. Some rich guy tried to make you feel small for being happy, and you stood up in a room full of people and didn't let him. That's not a rough day, Victoria. That's a day you'll be glad you had 10 years from now. She read it 3 times. You're not scared off, she wrote. A man ran a background check on you. Because of me. Let me tell you something about background checks, Nathan wrote. I've got nothing to hide. I've got a decent credit score, a paid-off car that embarrasses you, 1 parking ticket from 2019 that I'm still bitter about, and a 7-year-old who thinks I hung the moon. Your board guy wasted his money. There's no dirt. There's just a guy who likes you. Victoria laughed out loud alone in her car, the sound surprising her. You're not what I expected, she wrote. At the mixer, I mean, when you walked over. I had you figured out in about 4 seconds, and I was wrong about every single thing. What did you have me figured for? A man who'd sit down, realize who I was, and spend the next 20 minutes finding a way to mention that his company was looking for investors. And instead you asked me about a book. There was a pause. Then Nathan wrote, Come over. Victoria blinked. What? Not tonight. You've had a rough day and Lily's asleep. But soon. Come over. Meet her. It's time. Victoria's heart did something complicated in her chest. She knew what this was. She wasn't a fool. She understood exactly how careful he'd been, how he'd kept his daughter walled off from all of this, how the fact that they'd been seeing each other for a month and she'd never so much as glimpsed the little girl was not an accident, but a decision made by a man who'd watched his child lose one person already and would sooner die than let it happen twice. She understood that being invited to meet Lily was not the same as being invited to dinner. It was Nathan handing her something breakable and trusting her not to drop it. Are you sure, she wrote? That's a big step. For her, I mean. I don't want to be someone who comes into that little girl's life and then, I know, Nathan wrote. I've thought about it more than I've thought about anything in 3 years. That's how I know I'm sure. Come meet my daughter Victoria. And bring Emily if she'll come. Let's stop having 2 separate lives that we sneak away from to see each other. Let's see if the whole thing fits. Victoria sat in her dark garage, 48 years old, CEO of a company worth billions. A woman who had that very afternoon faced down a hostile board without her voice rising once, and she found that her hands were shaking and that it had nothing to do with Gerald Hume. What if she doesn't like me? She typed. She almost deleted it. It was the most naked thing she'd ever sent anyone. It was a 7-year-old's fear in a 48-year-old's phone. She hit send before she could stop herself. Then she doesn't like you, Nathan wrote. And we figure it out from there. But Victoria, you're worried about the wrong thing. You keep bracing for people to want something from you. Lily's 7. She doesn't know what a CEO is. She doesn't know what a stock price is. She's going to look at you and see exactly one thing, whether or not you actually listen to her. That's the whole test. That's it. And I've watched you listen to me for a month. A pause then. You're going to pass Victoria. You've been passing this whole time. You just don't believe anybody's really grading fairly. Victoria put the phone against her chest and closed her eyes and breathed. For 30 years, she had lived by her mother's law. Everyone wants something. Keep the door locked. Trust no one. It had been a good law. It had kept her safe. It had built her an empire. And it had left her sitting alone in a dark garage, unable to remember the last time someone waited for the answer to how her day went. She lifted the phone back up. Saturday, she typed. Emily and I will come Saturday. Saturday, Nathan wrote. I'll make Lily clean her room, which she'll say is unfair, which it is. Victoria laughed again, and this time, when the tears came, she let them alone in the dark, and they weren't the kind that hurt. She wiped her face, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, and did something she hadn't done in longer than she could remember. She drove home not dreading the empty house, but counting the hours until Saturday. She just didn't know yet that Gerald Hume, sitting in his own car across town, was making a phone call of his own. That the word postponed was to a man like him only ever a temporary condition. That some people, when they can't win an argument at the table, simply go looking for a different table entirely. Victoria didn't know any of that yet. For now she only knew that on Saturday, for the first time in her life, she was going to be graded by a 7-year-old, and that terrifyingly, wonderfully, it was the only test she'd ever actually wanted to pass. Saturday came, and Nathan made Lily clean her room, and Lily said it was unfair, which it was. "Why does it have to be clean if she's just going to be in the living room?" Lily demanded, standing in the middle of a floor that could not be seen for the toys. "Because," Nathan said, hauling a laundry basket in and setting it down. "When people come to your house for the first time, you make it nice for them. That's how you show them you're glad they came." "Are you glad she's coming?" Nathan paused with a stuffed animal in each hand. "I am." "How glad?" "Room cleaning glad. Now start with the books, they're the easy part." Lily started with the books. She was quiet for a while, which for Lily was unusual, and therefore worth watching. Then she said, not looking up, "Daddy, is she going to be my new mom?" Nathan set the stuffed animals down in the basket and crouched to her level, the way he always did when the questions got real. "No, baby. She's not going to be your mom. You've got a mom. She just doesn't live with us. That's not going to change." He tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. "Victoria's my friend. And I want her to be your friend too, but nobody's replacing anybody. That's not how it works. You've got room in your heart for lots of people. Adding one doesn't take another one away." Lily considered this. "Does she have a daughter?" "She does. Emily. She's 10. 10. Lily made the same face she'd made the first time. 10-year-olds think. 7-year-olds are babies. I know you told me. Maybe give her a chance to think something else before you decide." He stood up, knees popping. "Come on, books." They finished the room. Nathan changed his shirt twice and hated himself for it. He put out cheese and crackers, and then thought that looked like he was trying too hard, and then decided trying too hard was fine actually, and left it. At 11 o'clock, he heard a car in the driveway, and his heart did the ridiculous thing it had been doing for a month now, and he opened the door before she could knock. Victoria stood on his doorstep, and for a woman who ran a company, she looked absolutely terrified. "Hi," she said. "Hi." Behind her, arms crossed, half hidden by her mother, was a 10-year-old girl with Victoria's exact sharp eyes and an expression that made it very clear she had been dragged here against her will. "This is Emily," Victoria said. "Hi, Emily," Nathan said. "I'm Nathan. I'm really glad you came." Emily looked at him with the flat, evaluating stare of a child who had learned early not to hand out approval for free. "My mom said we had to." "Emily," Victoria said. "It's okay," Nathan said. "She's not wrong. You did kind of have to." He stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come on in. There's a 7-year-old in there who's been cleaning her room all morning and telling me the whole time that 10-year-olds think 7-year-olds are babies. So fair warning, she's braced for you." Something flickered across Emily's face. Curiosity, maybe. The faint interest of a child who has just been told she has a reputation to live down. They came inside. The first 10 minutes were as awkward as Nathan had expected. Lily hovered in the hallway, suddenly shy, peeking around the corner at the older girl. Emily stood by the door with her arms crossed, refusing to be impressed by anything. Victoria perched on the edge of the couch like she might need to make a fast exit. And Nathan did what he always did. When a room was tense, he started talking easy and low about nothing, letting the sound of an unbothered voice fill the space until the fear had somewhere to go. It was Lily who broke it. Of course it was. She'd been staring at Emily, and finally she blurted out the thing she'd apparently been holding in. "Do you really think 7-year-olds are babies?" Emily blinked, caught off guard by the directness of it. "What?" "My dad said 10-year-olds think 7 is babies. Do you think I'm a baby?" Everybody held their breath a little. Eh. Emily looked at the small, fierce, offended child in front of her, and something in her expression cracked just slightly. I mean, she said, kind of, but you seem okay. I have a fort, Lily said, apparently deciding this was the deciding argument. In my room. It has a secret entrance. Emily's arms uncrossed the smallest amount. What kind of secret entrance? You have to know the password. What's the password? Lily gave her a look of profound disappointment. If I told you, it wouldn't be a secret. And Emily, 10 years old, sharp-eyed, dragged here against her will, daughter of a woman who trusted no one, laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it, surprised right out of her. Okay, Emily said. Okay, show me the fort. But it better actually be a fort and not just like a blanket. It's not just a blanket, Lily said, deeply offended, already leading the way. It's a blanket and 2 chairs and a broom to hold up the top. They disappeared down the hall. And just like that, the 2 adults were alone in the living room, listening to the sound of their daughters negotiating the terms of a fort, and Nathan watched every ounce of tension drain out of Victoria Bennett's shoulders all at once, like someone had cut a wire. Oh, Victoria said faintly, sitting down properly for the first time. Oh, thank God. You were worried. I was terrified. Emily doesn't... Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth for a second. Emily doesn't warm up to people, ever. She's like me. It's my fault I taught her to keep the door locked without ever saying a word about it. She just watched me do it her whole life and learned it. She hasn't laughed like that with a stranger in, I don't know, I can't remember. Kids are better at this than we are, Nathan said. They haven't learned yet that they're supposed to protect themselves. They just find the person with the fort. Victoria looked at him. Down the hall, the girls were laughing about something, Lily's high giggle and Emily's more careful one, twining together. I've spent a fortune, Victoria said quietly, on the best of everything for that girl. The best school, the best tutors, the best of every single thing money can buy. And she just walked into a house half the size of her bedroom and made a friend over a fort held up with a broom. She shook her head slowly. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Why not both? Nathan said, and handed her a cracker. The afternoon unspooled from there easy in a way Nathan hadn't dared to hope for. The girls emerged from the fort to demand snacks, then vanished back into it. Then they wanted to show Victoria the fort, and Nathan watched the CEO of Bennett Technologies get down on her hands and knees in a 7-year-old's bedroom and crawl through a secret entrance and sit cross-legged inside a fort made of blankets and a broom, gravely accepting a plastic cup of pretend tea. He stood in the doorway watching, and he thought his chest might crack open. Later, when the girls had commandeered the TV and the light was going gold in the windows, Victoria found Nathan in the kitchen and stood beside him while he did dishes, and for a while neither of them said anything, and it was the good kind of nothing. I have to tell you something, she said finally. Okay. The board thing, Gerald Hume. It's not over. Nathan turned off the water. I figured it wouldn't be. Guys like that don't lose one round and go home. He's making calls. I've heard from 2 people this week, allies people who tell me things that he's talking to the other board members individually, building a coalition. He's going to try to force a vote of no confidence, push me out or at least push me into a chairman role with no real power, and he's using... She stopped. Using me, Nathan said. Using the idea of you. The narrative. The CEO whose judgment is failing, who's making reckless personal choices, who's not focused on the acquisition. He's turning us into evidence. Her jaw tightened. I've fought off worse. I'm not scared of Gerald. But I wanted you to know, because it's going to get uglier before it gets better, and there might be more photographs, and I need you to decide with clear eyes whether you want to be standing next to me while it happens. Nathan dried his hands on a dish towel. Then he set the towel down and turned to face her fully. There's a charity event, he said. You mentioned it. Your company's foundation, the gala week after next. Yes. Why, am I invited? Victoria looked at him. You want to come to that, Nathan? It's exactly the kind of room where the knives come out. It's Gerald's people. It's the board. It's every Roger Vance in the city. If you show up on my arm, you're going to be walking straight into it. Then that's where I want to be. Nathan said it simply. Look, you've spent this whole thing protecting me, keeping the board stuff away from me, apologizing for your world worrying. I'll get scared off. And I appreciate it, I do. But that's backwards. You don't hide the person you're with in a bunker while you take all the fire. That's not how it works. Not for me. He took her hand. So I'm coming to the gala. And if Gerald Hume or anybody else wants to make you feel small in a room full of people, they're going to have to do it with me standing right there. And I promise you, Victoria, I'm a lot harder to make feel small than they're expecting. Victoria looked at their hands, then at his face. You have no idea what those rooms are like, she said softly. I know exactly what those rooms are like, Nathan said. I've just always been on the outside of them getting looked down on. This time, I'll be on the inside of one getting looked down on. Different view, same feeling. I can handle it. Victoria laughed, but it caught in her throat. Why are you like this? Like what? Like, she gestured helplessly. Like you'd walk into a room full of people who despise you just so I don't have to be in it alone. Nathan thought about it. Because 3 years ago, he said, I was in a room full of people at a work thing, right after my wife left. And everybody in that room knew. You could feel it. The pity, the whispers, the little glances. And I stood there feeling like the loneliest man on earth, and not one single person crossed that room to stand next to me. Not one. He shrugged. I decided that night that if I ever saw somebody else standing alone in a room like that, I'd cross it. Every time. No matter what. He squeezed her hand. You were standing alone in a room, Victoria, at a mixer, reading a book pretending you didn't care that 200 people had written you off. I crossed the room. I'm not going to stop crossing it now just because the room got fancier. Victoria didn't say anything. She couldn't. She just stepped forward and put her forehead against his chest, and Nathan wrapped his arms around her, and they stood there in the kitchen, while their daughters laughed at cartoons in the other room, and neither of them said a word, because there wasn't one that would have made it any truer than it already was. The gala was 2 weeks later, and it was everything Victoria had warned him it would be. It was held in a ballroom that made the mixer's ballroom look like a garage, chandeliers, a string quartet, waiters in white gloves moving through a crowd of people who represented collectively an amount of money that could have ended homelessness in 3 states. Victoria wore a gown the color of deep water, and every person in the room turned to watch her enter, and Nathan, in a rented tuxedo that fit almost right, walked in beside her with his head up. He felt the looks immediately. The same temperature on the back of his neck he'd felt at the mixer, except worse, colder, because these people had had 2 weeks to prepare their opinions, and Gerald Hume had spent those 2 weeks making sure the opinions were the right ones. There she is, someone murmured. With the, is that him? The one from the photograph? The single dad from the diner. My God, she actually brought him. Victoria's hand tightened on Nathan's arm. He put his own hand over hers, steadying, and leaned in. Breathe, he murmured. You've faced worse than a room. I've watched you do it. She breathed. Gerald Hume found them within the hour. He came gliding across the floor with a glass of champagne and a smile that had nothing behind it. A tall, silver-haired man in a tuxedo that fit perfectly, and Nathan understood watching him approach, that this was a man who had spent his entire life being the most powerful person in every room and had never once had to wonder whether he belonged there. Victoria, Gerald said warmly, as if the last board session had never happened. Radiant as always. And he turned to Nathan, and his smile sharpened by a degree. You must be the famous Nathan. I feel like I know so much about you already. I bet you do, Nathan said pleasantly. You paid to. A flicker in Gerald's eyes. He hadn't expected that. He recovered smoothly. I'm sorry. The background check, Nathan said. Victoria told me. You spent company money to look into me. So you probably know I've got a parking ticket from 2019 I'm still bitter about. Anything else you want to ask, you can just ask me directly. Save yourself the research budget. A small crowd had begun in the way of these rooms to gather at the edges of the conversation, sensing blood in the water. Gerald noticed it too, and Nathan watched him make a calculation, the calculation of a man who had an audience and intended to use it. "Well," Gerald said, raising his voice, just slightly pitching it for the listeners. "I admire the confidence. I do. It takes a certain boldness for a man in your position to walk into a room like this." He let his eyes travel deliberately over Nathan's rented tuxedo. "On the arm of a woman like Victoria. I suppose when you've got nothing to lose." A few people laughed, the soft, cruel laugh of a crowd that has decided which way the wind is blowing. Victoria's spine went rigid. "Gerald, it's a fair question though, isn't it?" Gerald pressed on, warming to it now, playing to the ring of listeners. "I mean, one does wonder. A woman builds an empire, becomes one of the most powerful people in the industry, and then, he spread his hands all reasonableness, and then she brings this to a gala, a middle manager, a divorced father who moves boxes for a living. One does have to ask what a man like that could possibly offer a woman who already has everything." He smiled and delivered the line he'd clearly been saving. "I suppose even billionaires eventually run out of options." The crowd went silent. It was the exact silence Victoria had felt 100 times the silence of a room waiting to see whether the powerful man's cruelty would be allowed to stand. She opened her mouth. Every instinct honed over 30 years told her to level Gerald where he stood, to cut him down with the surgical precision she'd used in 100 boardrooms. But Nathan's hand touched her arm. A light touch. "Wait." And Nathan stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't puff up. He looked at Gerald Hume with something that wasn't anger at all. Something closer to patience. The patience of a man who had spent 3 years being underestimated and had learned exactly how useful it was. "You're looking at the wrong thing," Nathan said. Gerald frowned. "I beg your pardon. You keep saying what a man like me could offer a woman like her. And you're measuring it all wrong. You're measuring what I have. The car, the job, the tuxedo I rented." Nathan tugged lightly at his own lapel, unbothered. "You looked me up, so you know exactly what I have, right down to the parking ticket. And by your math, it's not much. You're right about that. By your math, I've got nothing." He looked around the room slowly, meeting eyes the way Victoria did in her board sessions. And the crowd was so quiet now you could hear the string quartet 3 rooms away. "But here's what your math missed," Nathan said. "You looked at Victoria, and you saw a woman who has everything. And you're right, she does. She's got the company, the money, the houses, the whole thing. You've spent 2 years, from what I hear, trying to take it away from her, and you looked at all of it and you thought, what could that woman possibly need?" He shook his head slowly. "You never once asked whether she was happy, did you? In 2 years on her board, you never once wondered whether the most powerful woman you know goes home to an empty house and can't remember the last time somebody asked how her day went. That never crossed your mind because you don't see a person. You see an asset, a chair you want, a thing to be managed, and when it suits you, taken." Gerald's smile had gone rigid. "Now see here, I'm not finished." Nathan didn't raise his voice, but something in it made Gerald stop. "You want to know what I offer her? Here it is. Every single day for the rest of her life, if she'll have me, I offer her the one thing that all of this—" He gestured at the chandeliers, the champagne, the entire glittering room. "None of it could ever buy her. I offer her a person who wants nothing from her. Nothing. Not her money, not her company, not her name, not her connections. A person who looked at her before he knew who she was and saw somebody worth crossing a room for. That's what I offer. And you stand there in your $10,000 tuxedo and you can't even conceive of it because in your entire life, Gerald, I don't think a single person has ever wanted you for anything other than what you could do for them. And you know what? That's the saddest thing in this room. Sadder than my rented tux. Because I'll go home tonight to a daughter who thinks I hung the moon, and a woman I'd cross any room on earth to stand next to. And you'll go home to a background check, and a board seat, and a whole lot of people who are only nice to you because they're afraid of you. The silence in the room had changed completely. It was no longer the silence of a crowd waiting for cruelty to land. It had become something else. The listeners weren't looking at Nathan with contempt anymore. Several of them were looking at Gerald. Nathan turned to Victoria, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, meant for her, though the whole room heard it. And honestly, he said, the bigger question isn't what I could offer her. It's why a woman like Victoria Bennett would ever choose a man like me. She could have anybody. She's got a room full of people who'd trip over themselves to be with her. And she looked at all of them, and she chose the guy with the paid-off car and the 7-year-old and the parking ticket. He looked at her, and the whole rest of the room fell away for a second. I don't know why she did that. I ask myself every day. But I know I'm not going to waste it. Not one day of it. Victoria was crying. She was standing in the middle of a gala she'd walked into, as armored as a battleship, in front of the very people she'd spent her whole life proving herself to, and she was crying openly, and she did not care. Because for years, for her entire adult life, she had been treated as a woman too successful to need love, too powerful, too wealthy, too complete. People had wanted her money and feared her power and admired her from a careful distance. And not one of them, not a single one in 30 years, had ever stood up in a room full of her peers and said she is a person and she deserves to be happy, and I would cross any room on earth to reach her. Nathan Cole had just done it in front of 200 people who despised him. Gerald Hume stood frozen, his champagne glass sweating in his hand, and he understood the room made sure he understood that he had reached for a knife and picked up the wrong end. He had tried to make Victoria's happiness look like weakness, and instead, he'd handed the entire room a front-row seat to something none of them had, something all their money couldn't buy, and every person watching knew it. I think, said a voice from the crowd, an older woman, elegant, one of the foundation's largest donors, that this is the best thing I've seen at one of these galas in 20 years. She lifted her glass slightly toward Nathan. Young man, whatever you're offering, it appears to be in short supply in this room. A ripple of something moved through the crowd. Not laughter. Something warmer and more dangerous to Gerald than laughter, agreement. Gerald set his champagne down on a passing tray with a hand that wasn't quite steady. This is a private matter hardly appropriate for... He didn't finish. He turned and walked away, and the crowd parted for him, and it was not the parting of respect. It was the parting people do for a man who has just lost something in public. The gala resumed around them, conversation rising again, but it was different now and everyone could feel it. Victoria wiped her face with the back of her hand, laughing and crying at once, and Nathan pulled a folded handkerchief out of his rented tuxedo pocket and handed it to her. You carry a handkerchief, she said, half laughing, taking it. Single dad, he said. I carry everything. Handkerchief, granola bar, 3, Band-Aids, a spare hair tie, you learn. Victoria pressed the handkerchief to her eyes, and then she looked at him, and her voice, when it came out, was not the CEO's voice, and not the armored voice, and not any voice he'd heard from her before. It was small, and stripped bare, and completely, terrifyingly honest. Nobody's ever done that for me, she said. In my whole life. Do you understand that I'm 48 years old, and I have done everything, been everywhere, met everyone and no one. No one has ever stood up in a room and said I was worth choosing. They chose my company. They chose my money. They chose the version of me that could do something for them. You just... Her voice broke. You just stood in front of everyone who matters in my world and told them I deserved to be happy. Like it was obvious. Like it was the most obvious thing in the world. It is the most obvious thing in the world, Nathan said. That's the part that kills me. That nobody ever told you before. And Victoria Bennett understood, standing in that ballroom under the chandeliers with a borrowed handkerchief pressed to her face, that the thing she had been afraid of her whole life was not being old, and it was not being alone, and it was not even losing her company to a man like Gerald Hume. The thing she had been afraid of all along was never once being truly seen. And the man standing in front of her in a rented tuxedo, who carried a handkerchief and a granola bar and 3 Band-Aids, because a 7-year-old had taught him to had just seen straight through to the center of her in front of everyone and called it beautiful. "Take me home," she whispered. "I want to go home. Not to a house. Home. Wherever that is now." Nathan offered her his arm. "I know a place," he said. "Small, half the size of your bedroom. There's a fort in it held up with a broom, and if you know the password, they might even let you in." Victoria laughed through her tears and took his arm. And together, in front of the whole watching room, they walked out. Not the powerful woman and the man beneath her. Not the CEO and the nobody. Not the story 200 people had been so sure they were about to witness. Just two people who had spent their whole lives being seen as everything except themselves, walking out of a golden room toward a small one where their daughters were waiting, and where for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, neither of them was going to be alone. They did not fall in love overnight, whatever the gala might have made it look like to the people watching. That was the thing Nathan tried to explain to Marcus a few weeks after, when Marcus kept talking about the gala like it had been the end of a movie. Word had gotten around, it always did, and Marcus had heard 3 different versions of what Nathan had said to Gerald Hume, each one more heroic than the last. "They're saying you told off a billionaire in front of the whole society crowd," Marcus said. "That true. He's not a billionaire. He's a board member. And I didn't tell him off. I just told the truth in a room where nobody expected anybody to." Same thing. "It's not the same thing," Nathan said. "And that's exactly the problem with how everybody's telling it. They're making it sound like some big dramatic moment fixed everything. It didn't fix anything. It was one night. You want to know what actually matters? It's not the gala. It's the Tuesday after the gala, when Victoria came over and Lily had a fever of 102 and threw up on the couch, and Victoria took off her $1,000 jacket and helped me clean it up, and then sat on the floor of a sick kid's bedroom until midnight, reading her stories in funny voices. That's the part that matters. That's the part nobody's telling." Marcus was quiet for a second. She did that. And she was terrible at the voices. Really bad. Lily loved it. Because that was the truth of it, and Nathan knew it even if the gossip didn't. The gala had been a moment. Moments were easy. Anybody could rise to a moment. What was hard, what actually built something, was all the unglamorous space between the moments. And that was where he watched Victoria Bennett slowly, awkwardly, learn how to be a person again. She was at first spectacularly bad at it. She didn't know how to just be somewhere without an agenda. The first few times she came over for no reason, no dinner planned, no event, just to be there. She'd sit on the edge of the couch with her phone in her hand, thumb hovering, twitching toward it every few minutes, like a smoker reaching for a pocket that wasn't there. "You can put it down," Nathan told her one evening. "The phone. Nothing's going to fall apart if you put it down for an hour. You don't understand. If I don't answer, they escalate. There's always something. There's always something because you always answer. If you stopped answering for 1 hour, they'd learn to solve one problem without you, and that'd be good for everybody, including you." Victoria looked at the phone in her hand like it was a limb she didn't know how to detach. "I built the whole company on being the person who answers." "And it made you rich," Nathan said. "And it made you exhausted. And it made your daughter grow up thinking your face was the back of a phone. I'm not saying quit your job. I'm saying 1 hour. You and me and 2 kids and a bad movie. The company survives 1 hour." She put the phone down. She picked it back up 11 minutes later. She put it down again. It took months, not one heroic evening. But slowly, the intervals got longer. And one night, Nathan realized halfway through a movie that she hadn't reached for it in over an hour, and that she was asleep on his shoulder, and that she looked for the first time since he'd met her entirely at rest. He didn't move for an hour and a half. His arm went numb. He didn't care. That was how it went. In pieces. In small, hard-won choices. Victoria was learning that she didn't always have to be the strong one, and it did not come naturally to a woman who had made strength her entire identity. "I don't know how to need anyone," she confessed to him once, late, both kids asleep, the 2 of them, at his kitchen table with cold coffee. "I know how to be needed. I'm the best in the world at being needed. But needing somebody back, I genuinely don't know how to do it. It feels like... She searched for it. It feels like standing on a ledge. Every instinct I have says don't. Says if you lean on someone, they'll figure out where you're weak and they'll use it. That's your mother talking. That's my mother and my father and 30 years of being right about people. She wrapped both hands around the cold mug. You know how many times I've been right, Nathan? To not trust someone almost every time. That's the horrible part. My whole life when I assumed the worst about somebody's motives, I was usually correct. It's a hard thing to unlearn when it kept being true. I bet it is. Nathan reached across the table and covered her hand with his. But here's the thing about that. You were meeting the wrong people. You were surrounded your whole life by people who had a reason to be around you. Investors, employees, board members, the whole crowd. Of course, they all wanted something. You built a machine that attracts people who want things. That's what a company is. He turned her hand over, held it. You weren't wrong about them. You were just never around anybody who wasn't them. Until now. Victoria stared at their hands. How do I know you're different genuinely? Not because it's a nice thing to believe. How do I know? You don't, Nathan said. That's the whole deal. That's what needing somebody is. You don't get to know first. You just have to decide to lean and find out whether they hold. That's terrifying. It's the most terrifying thing there is. It's more terrifying than any board vote. I know because I've watched you walk into board fights without blinking, and I've watched you go white as a sheet, just letting yourself fall asleep on my couch. He squeezed her hand. You want to know a secret? I'm scared too. I've been scared this whole time. Last time I leaned on somebody, she left, and it about killed me. And it definitely about killed a 4-year-old who didn't understand where her mom went. So don't think I'm doing this from some fearless place. I'm not. I'm just doing it scared. That's the only way anybody does it. Scared, but doing it anyway. Victoria was quiet a long time. Emily asked me something last week, she finally said. She asked why I smile more now. What did you tell her? I lied. I said work was going well. Victoria let out a breath. The truth is, I smile more because for the first time in her whole life, her mother isn't afraid all the time, and she noticed. A 10-year-old noticed her mother was less afraid, and I didn't even have the courage to tell her why. She looked up at him, eyes bright. That's what you've done, Nathan. You didn't just make me happy. You made me less afraid. And my daughter can see it on my face. And that Nathan thought was worth more than every word he'd said at the gala. Because while Victoria was learning to need Nathan, was learning something too, and it was just as hard for him. He was learning that his life didn't have to be only survival. For 3 years, Nathan had lived by a single principle: keep the ship afloat. Make the money stretch. Get Lily to school. Get her fed, get her to sleep, get up, do it again. He'd built a whole identity around endurance, around being the man who didn't break no matter what. And somewhere in that endurance, he'd stopped believing his life could be anything more than a series of days survived. Victoria was the one who caught it. Can I ask you something? She said one evening, watching him move around his kitchen. When's the last time you did something just for you? Not for Lily, not for work. For you. Nathan had to think about it. He thought about it for an uncomfortably long time. I don't know, he admitted. I used to run. Before. I liked running. Haven't in a while. Why'd you stop? No time. And it felt, he shrugged, uncomfortable, selfish. An hour I could be with Lily spent on me. Didn't seem right. Nathan. Victoria set down her glass. Do you hear yourself? You've built a whole religion out of not letting yourself have anything. You won't run because it's an hour away from your daughter. You won't rest because resting feels like quitting. You've turned your entire life into penance, and I don't even think you know you did it. I did what I had to do. You did, and it was heroic, and I mean that you kept a little girl's whole world from falling apart with your bare hands. But somewhere in there you decided you weren't allowed to be a person anymore, only a father. And those aren't the same thing. Lily doesn't need a martyr. She needs a dad who's actually alive, who runs sometimes, who has a life so that she learns a life is a thing a person's allowed to have. Nathan stood very still. That's a hell of a thing to hear from the woman who couldn't put her phone down for an hour, he said finally. Victoria laughed, caught. I know. Believe me, I know. We're a disaster, the two of us. You won't rest, and I won't stop working. Maybe that's why it works. We each got exactly the flaw the other one needs fixed. Maybe, Nathan said. And then after a moment, I'll start running again, if you put the phone down for an hour a night. That's blackmail. That's a deal. Take it or leave it. She took it. It became a thing between them, a quiet private economy of small repairs. She learned to rest. He learned to live. She'd text him a photo of her phone sitting face down on a table, hers, and he'd send back a photo of his running shoes by the door. Small proofs, small leans. Two people who'd forgotten how to be people teaching each other 1 hour at a time. And the children became the glue neither of them had planned for. Lily adored Victoria. It happened fast, and it happened total the way 7-year-olds love, without reservation, without measuring all the way. Victoria, it turned out, was a fountain of stories about the strange world of business, and Lily could not get enough of them. Victoria would come over, and Lily would climb into her lap and demand, "Tell me about a meeting where somebody was bad." And Victoria, who had spent 30 years hardening herself for boardrooms, would find herself telling a 7-year-old the story of some negotiation, translated into the terms of a playground dispute, and Lily would gasp at all the right moments and declare judgment on the villains. "And then what did you do?" Lily demanded during one such story. "I told him that if he tried to change the deal at the last minute, I'd walk away from the table entirely." Lily's eyes went wide. "Did you walk away?" "I stood up and started walking." "Did he follow you?" "He followed me into the elevator, apologizing." Lily collapsed backward in delight. "You're like a superhero, but for money." "That," Victoria said, "is the nicest thing anyone has ever called me." And she meant it, Nathan could tell. Somewhere in the middle of the corporate wars, being called a money superhero by a 7-year-old had landed on Victoria Bennett as pure gold, worth more than any headline. Emily was harder, she was older, warier, more her mother's daughter, but Nathan was patient with her in a way that slowly wore the wariness down. He never pushed. He never tried to be her father. He understood she had one somewhere, complicated as that was, and he never tried to fill a chair that wasn't his. He just listened. Whenever Emily talked, he stopped whatever he was doing and listened all the way, and it took Emily a while to understand that he wasn't going to check his phone in the middle, that the listening was real. "He actually listens," Emily said to her mother once in the car, and Victoria had to grip the wheel to keep from crying, because she knew exactly how rare that was, and she knew her daughter had grown up starved for it, and she knew whose fault that was. "He does," Victoria managed. "Nobody listens like that," Emily said. "Not even you. No offense." "None taken," Victoria whispered. "You're right. I'm trying to be better." "I know," Emily said, and then 10 years old and casual and devastating. "You are better. Since him. It's nice. I like you better now." Victoria pulled the car over. She had to. She sat on the side of the road and cried while her 10-year-old patted her arm awkwardly and said, Mom, it's a compliment. Why are you crying at a compliment?" And Victoria laughed and cried harder and thought that she would trade the whole company, the houses, the jet, all of it for this one sentence from her daughter. Not everyone was moved by the transformation. Gerald Hume had gone quiet after the gala humiliated regrouping, but not gone. Victoria knew better than to think he was finished, and about 2 months after the gala, he made his real move. It came as she'd predicted, as a vote. Gerald had spent his quiet months doing what men like Gerald did, making calls, trading favors, finding the pressure points on each individual board member. And he'd built enough of a coalition to call for it, a formal vote on Victoria's continued leadership, framed around the acquisition, dressed up in the language of governance and stability and fiduciary responsibility. but everyone knew what it really was. It was Gerald's last best attempt to take the chair he'd wanted for years. Victoria told Nathan the night before the vote. They were at his kitchen table, the kids asleep. "It could go either way," she said. "I've done the count 100 times. It's close. If it goes wrong, I lose the company I built from nothing. Everything. 30 years. Nathan was quiet. "What do you need from me?" And she looked at him, and she started to cry, because a month ago, she would not have known how to answer that question. A month ago, she'd have said nothing. "I'll handle it," and gone into the fight alone, the way she'd gone into every fight alone her whole life. "I need," she said slowly, forcing the words out against 30 years of instinct. "I need you to be here when I get home tomorrow. Whatever happens, win or lose. I need to walk out of that room and know that there's one place in the world where it doesn't matter whether I still run a company. Where I'm just—" Her voice broke. "Where I'm just Victoria. That's what I need. Can you do that?" Nathan reached across the table and took both her hands. "I'll be here," he said. "Win or lose. And I'll tell you something else. If you lose that company tomorrow, if Gerald takes the whole thing, you know what changes for me? Nothing. Not one thing. I didn't cross that room at the mixer for a CEO. I crossed it for a woman reading a book by a window. If they take away everything that made you impressive to everybody else, you'll still be the most interesting person I've ever met, and I'll still want you at my terrible kitchen table drinking my terrible coffee. So go fight for your company tomorrow. Fight like hell, it's yours, you built it. But do it knowing you've already got the one thing they can't vote away." Victoria came around the table and into his arms and held on like she was drowning. "How did I find you?" she whispered into his shoulder. "In a whole world of people who only wanted things. How did I find the one who doesn't?" "A card," Nathan said. "Table 7. Somebody thought we'd be surprised." She laughed wetly. "Remind me to thank whoever programmed that app." The vote was the next afternoon. Nathan didn't hear anything for 6 hours. He knew better than to text. She'd reach out when she could. He picked Lily up from school, made dinner, helped with homework, kept his phone in his pocket and his eye on the door, and told himself 100 times that whatever happened, he'd meant every word, that it didn't change anything, that he'd be here. At 7:30, he heard a car in the driveway. He got to the door before she knocked the way he always did. He opened it. Victoria stood on his doorstep, and he couldn't read her face. She'd worn the armor to the vote, the deep water suit, the CEO posture, but the armor was cracked now, and underneath it he couldn't tell if what he was seeing was victory or grief. "Well," he said. Victoria looked at him, and then she smiled, a slow, exhausted, wondering smile. "I won?" she said. It wasn't even that close in the end. When it came down to it, 3 of the people Gerald thought he had turned around. One of them told me afterward that after the gala, after watching Gerald try to weaponize my personal life, he'd started to wonder what kind of man spends his energy trying to make a woman feel bad for being happy. And he decided he didn't want to hand the company to a man like that. Her smile trembled. "You did that, Nathan. Not on purpose. But that night at the gala when you refused to let him make me small, people remembered it. It cost Gerald more than he ever knew. He reached for a knife and it turned in his hand exactly like you said. Where's Gerald now?" "Resigning, I imagine. He lost too publicly to stay. Men like that can't survive being seen to lose." She stepped forward into the doorway, into the small, warm house that was half the size of her bedroom. "But that's not the part I keep thinking about." "What's the part?" "The part I keep thinking about," Victoria said, "is that 6 hours ago, I walked out of that room having just saved everything I've spent 30 years building. The biggest win of my career. And do you know what my first thought was, standing there, having won?" Her eyes filled. "My first thought was, I want to go home and tell Nathan. Not the board, not my mother, not a reporter. You. I won the fight of my life, and the only thing I wanted, the only thing, was to drive to a small house and tell one man about my day." She was crying now, and laughing. "And have him actually wait for the answer." Nathan pulled her inside and closed the door behind her. "So tell me," he said, holding her, "How was your day, Victoria?" And she laughed so hard she cried and cried so hard she laughed and buried her face in his chest, and Lily came running out at the sound to see what was happening, and threw her arms around both of their legs, without even knowing why. And Emily, who'd come with her mother, who'd been waiting in the car and followed her in, stood in the doorway watching the three of them tangled together in the little entryway, and for once didn't roll her eyes. They stood there, the four of them, in a house that any one of Victoria's board members would have looked down on, and there was more actual wealth in that entryway than in the entire glittering ballroom of the gala, and every person in it knew it. Later, much later, kids finally asleep, the two of them on the second-hand couch. Victoria said quietly, "Can I tell you what I was really afraid of? This whole time? Tell me." It was never Gerald. It was never even losing the company, not really. I could have started another one. I've done it before. She curled into his side. What I was really afraid of was that I'd get to the end of my whole life, all of it, the whole successful glittering thing, and realize that not one person had ever known me. That I'd been surrounded by thousands of people and died a stranger to every one of them. That's the fear. That's the one underneath all the others. Not being old, not being alone in a room, being alone in a life. Never once being truly seen. Nathan tightened his arm around her. "I see you," he said. "I saw you at table 7 with a book you were scared to finish. I see you now, and I'm not going to stop." "I know," Victoria said. And the remarkable thing, the thing that would have been impossible 3 months earlier, was that she said it and she believed it. All the way. No hedge, no calculation, no waiting for the other shoe. "That's the miracle of it. I actually know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me?" A woman 12 years older with a company that eats her alive, and a board full of Geralds and enough baggage to fill your whole living room. Nathan didn't answer right away. He looked at her, at the woman the whole mixer had written off, the woman he'd crossed a room for, the woman who'd learned to put down her phone and fall asleep on his shoulder. The woman who'd cried at a gala because one man finally said she deserved to be happy. "The only thing I regret," he said, "is that it took a random card at a singles mixer to find you. Somebody could have introduced us years ago. Think of all the terrible coffee we missed." Victoria laughed softly. "And the age thing, you really never think about it. 12 years. People talk. Let people talk. Age tells me when you were born. It doesn't tell me one single thing about who you are." He kissed the top of her head. "The day I start caring what a room full of Geralds thinks about the number on your driver's license is the day you should leave me, because it'll mean I forgot everything I learned crossing that room in the first place." Victoria was silent for a long moment, tucked into his side, listening to the small sounds of the small house, the tick of the heater, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the almost inaudible breathing of 2 sleeping girls down the hall. For the first time in her entire life, Victoria Bennett stopped worrying about how the world saw her. Because the one person whose opinion had come to matter more than the boards and the headlines and the whole watching world. The man beside her on a second-hand couch in a house half the size of her bedroom had already made up his mind about her worth a long time ago. He'd made it up at table 7 before he knew her name, before he knew her money, before he knew a single thing about her, except that she was a woman alone at a window brave enough to read a book while 200 people decided she didn't matter. He'd crossed the room then, and he was still every single day in every small, unglamorous choice crossing it. "For the record," Victoria murmured, half asleep, now warm and unafraid, "I don't regret it either. Any of it. The board, the Geralds, the whole exhausting thing. I'd do all of it again if it dropped me at table 7. Nathan smiled into her hair. "Worst match they ever made," he said softly. But Victoria was already asleep, and this time she didn't reach for her phone at all. 1 year later, Nathan stood in front of a hotel he recognized holding a card in his hand, and this time the card didn't say table 7. It said, "Reserved Bennett/Cole." "You're sure about this?" Victoria said, beside him, looking up at the building where a whole ballroom of people had once decided the two of them would fail. "It's a strange thing to celebrate. Most people go back to where they had a nice first date. We're going back to the place where everyone bet against us. That's exactly why we're going back, Nathan said. I want to sit at that table again, the actual table. Table 7 if they'll give it to us. He took her hand. I want to sit down in the place where 200 people were sure I'd walk away from you, and I want to have dinner with my wife. Victoria's ring caught the light as she squeezed his hand. It was a small ring. She'd insisted on a small ring. She could have bought a stone the size of a walnut, could have bought the jeweler, but she'd wanted something that didn't announce itself. Something that looked like it belonged on the hand of a woman who fell asleep on a second-hand couch. Nathan had proposed in his kitchen over terrible coffee, with both girls hiding in the hallway, giggling so loudly that it wasn't remotely a surprise, and Victoria had said yes before he finished the sentence, and Lily had come sprinting out yelling that she'd known the whole time, and she was going to be a flower girl, and she'd already picked her dress in her head. They'd been married 4 months now. The wedding had been small. Victoria had wanted it small, the way she'd wanted the ring small, deliberately, defiantly, a woman who'd spent 30 years doing everything large, now choosing on purpose to do the most important thing quietly. No board members, no investors, no press, though the press had tried. Just family and Marcus as best man, and Eleanor in the front row. Eleanor, who had come around slowly, grudgingly, and then all at once, the day she'd watched Nathan carry a sleeping Lily to the car and tuck a blanket around a child who wasn't even Victoria's, and murmur goodnight to her like she was made of glass. That one's real, Eleanor had said to Victoria that night in the voice she used maybe once a decade. I was wrong. Don't tell him I said so, and don't you dare let him go. The girls had been Flower Girl, and Emily's insistence, co-best woman, a title that did not exist, and that Emily had invented specifically, so she wouldn't have to stand with the Flower Girls being 10 and above such things, while still getting to stand up front. Nathan had agreed instantly. He'd learned over the year that the fastest way to Emily's heart was to take her seriously, and so at his wedding, there had been a best man and a co-best woman, and nobody had questioned it, because when a 10-year-old has decided she belongs somewhere, the wise adult simply makes room. Now, a year almost to the day since the mixer, they walked back into the hotel where it had all started. The maitre d' recognized the name on the reservation and led them across the same floor. The chandeliers were the same. The windows were the same, that same view of the city spread out below. And there by the window was the same table, and Nathan felt the whole strange circle of it close as they sat down. Table 7. Victoria said, running her fingers along the edge of it. They gave us table 7. I asked for it. Of course you did. She looked at him across at the same distance they'd sat a year ago when she was a stranger with a book, and he was a man everyone expected to flee. Do you know what I was doing exactly 1 year ago at this table to the day? Reading a book about 2 people who never met. Reading a book about 2 people who never met. She agreed, terrified to finish it. Convinced that the safest thing in the world was distance, that if I never let anyone actually reach me, they could never leave. I built a whole life on that. A company, a fortune, a very tall, very lonely tower, and I called it strength. She shook her head slowly. And then a man in a jacket that didn't fit right sat down across from me and asked about the book instead of the company, and the whole tower came down. 1 year. It took 1 year to knock down 30. I didn't knock anything down, Nathan said. You did. I just crossed a room. You did all the hard part. You let me stay. The server came. Nathan ordered water, still not sparkling, and Victoria laughed at the callback and ordered the same, and they sat at table 7 and had dinner as husband and wife in the exact place where a room full of strangers had been so sure of how their story would end. Can I confess something? Victoria said halfway through. About that night, a year ago. Confess. When you walked away. When you handed me that card and left me standing there in front of everyone, I was furious. She smiled at the memory of it. Genuinely furious. Nobody walks away from me. I'm the one who walks away. I decide when conversations are over. And you just got up and left and handed me the card and made it so that if anything ever happened again, it would have to be because I chose it. And I stood there thinking, Who does this man think he is? And then Roger Vance sat down and started talking about merger structures, and I realized I couldn't hear a single word he was saying because I was watching the door you'd walked out of. She laughed softly. I stood up in the middle of his sentence. Do you remember I called your name across the whole room? I remember. Everybody remembers. It's the second most dramatic thing that's ever happened at this table. What's the first? The bill's about to come and I forgot my wallet, so. Victoria laughed the full laugh, the one that had surprised her the first night, and didn't surprise her anymore because it lived close to the surface now where it belonged. But the reason they'd really come back, the reason Nathan had asked for this table this night, this circle closed, wasn't only to remember. It was because tomorrow the four of them were leaving. Not forever, but for the summer. Victoria had done a thing that 6 months earlier would have been unthinkable. She'd stepped back. Not out. She wasn't a woman who could ever fully step out, and Nathan didn't want her to be, but back. She'd promoted the deputy she'd been mentoring for years, restructured her role, cut her hours nearly in half, and cleared a whole summer for the first time in 3 decades. The company survived 1 hour, she'd told Nathan when she'd decided it. You were right about that a year ago. So I got curious. If it survives 1 hour, what does it survive? Turns out a lot more than I let myself believe. Turns out I was needed a lot less than I told myself, and that used to terrify me, and now it just feels like freedom. They were taking the girls to Europe for the summer. Bookstores, mostly Victoria's idea. She had a list. She wanted to take Lily and Emily to the oldest bookstores in the world, the ones she'd only ever read about, the ones she'd been too busy building an empire to visit. She wanted to buy the 2 of them each a book they'd remember their whole lives. She'd told Nathan to be the kind of mother whose face her daughter remembered, instead of the back of a phone. Emily said something to me last week, Victoria said now at table 7, turning her water glass. She said she couldn't wait for the trip. And then she said, this is the first time I've ever been excited about something with you and not been worried you were going to cancel. Victoria's eyes went bright. 10 years old, and that was the first time she trusted me not to cancel. It broke my heart and healed it in the same breath. You didn't cancel, Nathan said. That's the whole thing. You keep not canceling. She's learning she can count on you. That's not a thing that heals in one dramatic moment. That heals in 100 boring Tuesdays where you show up. And you keep showing up. I learned it from you. She reached across the table and took his hand. Everything I know about showing up, I learned watching you do it for Lily. 3 years of it before I ever met you. You'd already been doing the hard, quiet thing for 3 years before anyone was watching. Nobody gave you a gala for it. Nobody stood up in a ballroom and said Nathan Cole deserves to be happy. You just did it day after day with no audience at all. Her voice caught. So at our wedding, when I stood up to give my toast, do you remember what I said? You said I was the first person who ever waited for the answer to how your day went. That's what I said out loud. But here's what I meant. She held his hand tighter. I meant that I spent 48 years being admired by people who never knew me, and it took one man who'd already learned how to love someone with no reward at all. One man who'd been showing up for a little girl for 3 years in an empty house to teach me the difference between being admired and being loved. Nobody ever loved me before you, Nathan. They loved what I could do. You're the first person who loved me for nothing, for no reason, for no return. She wiped her eyes with the back of her free hand. And I didn't even know that was a thing a person could have until you crossed that room. Nathan brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles right beside the small, defiant ring. You had it the whole time, he said. You just needed somebody to hand you the card and let you decide. They didn't stay late. They had 2 girls at home with a babysitter and a plane to catch in the morning. And the truth was that neither of them cared much anymore about lingering in glittering rooms. They'd learned that the good part of life wasn't in rooms like this one. It was in the small house on the other side of town, in the fort held up with a broom, and the terrible coffee and the bad story voices and the 100 boring Tuesdays. But before they left, Nathan stopped at the table. He put his hand flat on it. Table 7, the worst match they'd ever made, and he looked around the ballroom one more time. A year ago, he said, Everybody in this room looked at us and saw a mistake. The single dad and the CEO who ran out of options. They had the whole thing figured out. And they were all wrong. They were all wrong. Victoria agreed, sliding her arm through his. You know what the funny part is, Nathan said. The app that matched us. The card. Somebody somewhere wrote an algorithm or maybe just made a mistake and it put my name at the same table as yours. And the whole room laughed. My best friend told me to go get a different card. Everybody was so sure it was the worst match they'd ever made. He turned to her. It was the best mistake anybody ever made in my whole life. And I get to be married to it. Victoria looked up at him. This woman, who had once been afraid of nothing except being truly seen, and who was now seen all the way down to the center of her every day, by a man who'd cross any room on earth to reach her. It wasn't a mistake, she said quietly. That's what I've decided. I used to call it the worst match they ever made. But I don't think it was a match at all, and I don't think it was a mistake. I think it was the one time in my whole life the world got something exactly right, and I almost missed it because I was too busy being afraid to look up from a book. You looked up. I looked up. She smiled. You made me look up. You said, I'm not most people, and pulled out the chair, and I looked up, and here we are. They walked out of the ballroom together past the same windows under the same chandeliers, and this time nobody was watching them, and that was somehow better than the night everyone had. They were just two people leaving a hotel going home to their kids catching a plane in the morning, to go stand in old bookstores and buy their daughters books they'd remember forever. In the car, Victoria leaned her head against the window and watched the city lights slide by, and she thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. The woman who couldn't remember the last time anyone asked how her day went. The woman who bought the same book over and over because she was too afraid to finish it. The woman who'd built a tower so tall and so lonely that she'd nearly convinced herself the loneliness was strength. I finished the book, you know, she said. Really finished it. Read it again last month, all the way through the ending and everything. The two writers who never met. How'd it feel the second time? Different. She was quiet for a moment. The first time I read it, that ending broke my heart. 40 years of letters, and they run out of time and never sit across a table from each other. It felt like the saddest thing in the world. It felt like a warning. She turned from the window to look at him, driving one hand on the wheel, the other reaching over to hold hers the way he always did. But I read it again last month, and it didn't feel sad at all. Because I realized the whole point of that book, the thing I couldn't see when I was living in that tower, is that they waited too long. They kept the distance because the distance felt safe, and it cost them everything. And I almost did the exact same thing. I almost kept my distance from you because it felt safe. I almost lived my whole life like those two writers, honest with people from far away, and never once letting anyone close enough to actually reach me. But you didn't. But I didn't, because a man walked across a room and sat down at my table and refused to keep his distance. She lifted his hand and pressed it to her cheek. That book isn't a sad story to me anymore, Nathan. It's the story of what almost happened to me. And every time I look at you across an actual table, a real one close enough to touch, I remember that I didn't run out of time. I got to sit down. I got to stay. They drove the rest of the way in the comfortable silence of two people who no longer needed to fill every quiet. And when they got home, the babysitter reported that the girls had insisted on packing and repacking their suitcases 4 times, and had finally fallen asleep in Lily's room in the Fort Emily's long 10-year-old legs sticking out the secret entrance, and Lily curled against her side. Nathan and Victoria stood in the doorway of that bedroom and looked at the 2 girls asleep in a fort held up with a broom. One of them, the daughter of a single father who'd nearly forgotten he was allowed to have a life. The other, the daughter of a CEO who'd nearly forgotten she was allowed to be a person. And neither of them said anything, because there wasn't anything that could have made the moment more complete than it already was. We should move them to their beds, Victoria whispered. In a minute, Nathan whispered back. Let me look at it another minute. So they looked, and Victoria Bennett, who had walked into a mixer a year ago as one of the most successful and least known people in the country, who'd sat alone at table 7, certain that the safest thing was distance, who'd been so sure that a man like Nathan would never want a woman like her, stood in the doorway of a small bedroom in a small house, watching two little girls sleep in a fort, holding the hand of a man who wanted nothing from her but her, and understood finally and completely that she had gotten everything backwards for 48 years. She'd thought love was something you earned by being impressive. It wasn't. Nathan hadn't loved her for a single impressive thing. He'd loved her for the book she was scared to finish, and the way she talked to a 7-year-old about business meetings, and the fact that she was underneath all the armor, just a tired person who'd never once been asked how her day went. She'd thought strength was distance. It wasn't. The strongest thing she'd ever done was let a man close enough to see her. She'd thought her age, her money, her position were the most important things about her, the things that defined whether she was worth choosing. They weren't. They'd never told anyone a single true thing about who she was. Age tells you when a person was born. It doesn't tell you the first real thing about their heart. And she'd thought for so long, for so many lonely years in that tall tower, that she'd left it too late. That she'd built the empire and won the wars and gathered the whole impressive glittering pile of it and traded away somewhere along the way any chance of being truly known. She hadn't left it too late. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. A card at a singles mixer that everybody laughed at, a table that everybody was sure would be a disaster. A man everybody expected to walk away. And instead, he pulled out a chair and sat down and asked about her book. Sometimes, the person the whole world tells you to walk away from is the person who walks toward you. Sometimes the match nobody wanted becomes the love nobody expected. And sometimes a woman who spent her entire life being seen as everything except herself finally meets the one person who looks past the age and the money and the title and the whole exhausting performance of it and sees simply and completely her. And in his eyes, she finds the only thing she was ever really missing. The only thing all that success could never buy, the only thing that was ever worth building a life around. Nathan Cole crossed a room for a woman everyone had written off. Victoria Bennett let him stay. And that, not the company, not the fortune, not the empire she'd spent her whole life building, that was the best thing either of them ever did.